Hey Brett, I was promising to show you my Mun Science program. We're going to do a quick science collection tour. You see my moon station in orbit around the moon. It is composed of a tanker, which has liquid fuel, RCS tanks, batteries, solar panels, a science module. This guy's job is to hold science reports. Eventually this is going to go back to Kerbin, and my lander. So I've been to a couple places, but it's time to go to a new place, so I'm going to fill up my tanks. So right-click here, right-click here, Alt-click on the lander's tanks, make sure we're topped up. The lander has 3 tanks. That one's good to go. That one's good to go. And a little more in there. And also need to top up my RCS, which is this bottom tank there. So RCS 2, Alt-click RCS. Wonderful. Alright, so Jebediah Kerman is good to go. All of my science modules are clean and set. You can tell because they're not open. Now I need to plan. Well, first I'm going to undock. These struts are left from something I had attached here before. They don't seem to get in the way, which is great. So I'm going to undock my lander. Switch to the lander and a little backwards puff. And I'm good. And I save all the time because this thing crashes like there's no tomorrow. Okay, so my goal, I've been there, I've planted a flag. These are the twin craters. I've been here, I think that's called the East Crater. My goal is to go here. It's really kind of dark. Okay, I've waited about 2 hours of game time, and the moon has already changed in its orbit so that there's definitely, the sun is definitely rising over this crater. So now I'm going to plan a quick descent. Okay, that's looking good. I'll be able to brake and descend straight down once I'm over the crater. So now the maneuver's planned, let's do it. Okay, good enough. That whole thing should count as the crater. Now the fun part, I get to watch the crater show up in the map view. The non-map view, the flying view. I don't know what to call this. Speed up a little bit and see if we can identify the terrain as it comes up on us. So here we go. That's the direction we're going. And yeah, you can already see it. There's the rim. Coming up on it pretty fast. I'm going to fly way over it, so I have a lot of braking to do. So I better start braking pretty much as soon as I cross over the rim. Okay. Yes, let's do that. Full throttle. So now the trick I've discovered is that when firing retrograde, your nose essentially pushes the retrograde vector away. So I'm going to sort of shove that retrograde vector up until it's at the top of the blue hemisphere, which means that I'll be traveling directly down at the ground. So my prograde vector will be at the peak of the orange hemisphere. So I'm going down to the ground. My retrograde vector will be at the peak of the blue hemisphere. So that means that I'll be coming on a nice straight line down to the ground. So let's aim for the middle of this smaller crater within a crater. Okay, and I'm really, I'm like, whoa. I'm kind of nervous at this point that I don't really know Wow, wow. Okay, this is bad. I'm just going to take off again, because that made me really nervous. Just everything got really dark. I'm really just steering by this little pip on the nav ball. More thrust, there comes the ground. Oh! And then correct, correct, correct. Okay, okay, yes! Alright, so I hit the ground, but I hit it well under the tolerance of my landing struts. I cut the engines, and I was able to use SAS to keep my stealth pointer upright. That is a successful landing. Don't try and land in the dark, is the lesson there, I think. It's really hard. Okay, on to the science. So what I've learned, and took a bit, is that there are units of science. Besides how many points they're worth, there's different reports, and the reports are stored places. So right now I'm going to observe this goo. It says the goo seems to be less dense here. Fantastic. So now there is a report inside that goo container, and it stays inside that goo container, at least for now. And the goo container won't work again unless I clean it up at the science module in orbit. Cleaning it typically destroys the data unless I remove the data first. Same thing goes for this materials bay. So back here there's a thermometer. You don't have to clean the thermometer, but taking multiple measurements will remove the previous measurement. So the game is to use all of these scientific instruments to take data, then pull the data out and store it somewhere. So I'll show you that process. The crew report is free to transmit, so I always just transmit that. There goes my antenna. 18 science for the crew report, lovely. Jebediah is really happy. Let's go out there. Because I got to get a surface sample. That's one of the important measurements. The surface sample can be stored in the landing can. It's one of the few one of the few reports that you can store in the landing can. If I tried to take the data out of these other instruments and then tried to re-enter the landing can, it would get mad at me and tell me I had to throw them away before entering. We don't want to do that. Alright, so I'm going to plant a flag just so I remember what craters I've landed in and which ones I haven't. Okay, this was called the Southwest crater. In honor of Brett. Okay. I'm going to take a surface sample, keep that, and EVA report. And I can't transmit it because I'm just in my suit. And that's it. Alright, so now I've officially collected all the science I can collect at this landing site. So let's not waste any time. Jebediah has been to the moon before. He is not nostalgic or emotional about it. He's just business, all business. Alright, so now if I right-click this landing can, I can see there's two pieces of stored data. That's the surface sample and the EVA report. I can transmit the EVA report. The sample appears to be radioactive. That's pretty cool. I'm going to keep the surface sample report so that I can get full points for it when I deliver it back to Kerbin. Alright, so I'm all set. Let me check my fuel levels. Ooh, I used a lot of fuel. It's a good thing this thing is built to have a lot of fuel in it. So now we're going to do some time acceleration, and I'm going to get back up to that orbiter. We are now just about 300 meters away and approaching quickly. The orbits are pretty well aligned. And now for... oh, wow, I'm really going at that thing fast. Let me try and stabilize my... where the hell... There's the target vector. Okay. So again, I'm going to push my retrograde vector into that pink target vector to kill any transverse stuff. And then, oh, perfect. I've just about stabilized my speed with respect to him. So now I'm going to get a much more reasonable and controlled approach by putting myself at the station and slowly accelerating. Alright, I had to come back to this later to narrate it post hoc, but this is an important bit. This actually took me a while to understand. Remember that stuff I was saying about the data being stored in the various modules. So you actually have to leave your landing craft to take the data out. So there I've just taken the surface sample out of the landing can, and now I'm taking the reports from the goo canister. So they're all being removed from their original locations and being stored with Jebediah Kerman there. The idea is to take them out and put them in the science module at the other end of the space station. Once they're, because that thing can hold an infinite number of reports. Once that's done, then because we're docked with the science module indirectly, but it's all part of the same ship at this point, we can reset the goo modules and the materials bay, which is otherwise impossible, and then of course land at a different spot and reuse them. So this is the big efficiency. Like once I have this station up in orbit, I can go down to the moon and come back up as many times as I have fuel for, and collect all the science reports in that science module, and then bring them back all at once. Alright, so here I'm getting the seismometer data. It's a little tricky. You got to get pretty close. And then the thermometer is always so hard to see. There it is. Oh, I floated away. Go back down. There you go. Giving myself advice. Alright, so I think at this point I'm sort of doing a mental check at this point. Do I have all the reports? 2 goos, materials bay, surface sample, seismic, temperature. The EVA report and the crew report should have already been transmitted. So now I'm just going to travel along the length of the station and to the other end where the science module is. Oh yeah, at this point I'm convinced that I've forgotten this goo container, even though I haven't. So I'm going to right-click it a bunch of times to see if I can take the data out. But then I become convinced that I have taken it. Alright, now time to go for the science module. I keep calling it the science module. That's not actually what it's called. It's like the science processing lab. I don't know. One thing I did do was I tested this end of the station pretty thoroughly on Kerbin to make sure that its parachutes were sufficient that it could land. Because obviously the worst possible thing here, I'm going to right-click the thing, gotta get pretty close. And there it is, store experiments. There are already 19, and I stored 6 more experiments. So now there's even more data on there. But yeah, that whole science module is actually equipped to be a lander, and I've tested it with its weight and a full fuel tank and its landing legs and everything to make sure it can safely land on Kerbin. Because obviously, after all the work of putting all the science data in there, not being able to recover the thing would be the worst. Alright, so now Jebediah is getting back in his landing can, ready for another expedition, because I still got some fuel.